Marcus Thompson thought he owned the world. At 17, he was the kind of kid who made others cross the street to avoid him. With fists like hammers and a reputation that made grown men nervous, he had never met someone he couldn't intimidate. His knuckles were scarred from countless fights, his smile was cruel, and his eyes held the cold confidence of someone who had never truly lost. But on a rainy Tuesday morning outside Buckingham Palace, Marcus would discover that some people don't break. Some people don't bend. And some people carry the authority of a 1,000-year-old tradition behind every movement they make. What happened next would be caught on 17 different phones, shared millions of times across social media, and turn a street thug into the most humiliated person on the internet. But more importantly, it would begin a journey that would transform a bully into something he never thought possible. This is the true story of what happens when unstoppable force meets immovable object, when modern arrogance collides with ancient duty, and when one moment of violence leads to a lifetime of unexpected consequences. The Royal Guard never moved a muscle when Marcus threw the punch. He didn't need to. Marcus Thompson had been building his reputation since he was 12 years old. Growing up in the rough neighborhoods of East London, he learned early that respect came through fear, and fear came through violence. His father left when Marcus was 8, leaving behind only empty beer bottles and the echo of angry voices. His mother, Sarah, worked 3 jobs just to keep their small flat, barely home long enough to notice her son was becoming something she wouldn't recognize. The first time Marcus hit someone, he was defending his lunch money from an older kid named Danny. The punch landed awkwardly, more luck than skill, but Danny went down hard. The crowd that gathered didn't see the fear in Marcus's eyes or the way his hand shook afterward. They only saw the bigger kid on the ground and Marcus standing over him. Word spread fast in their neighborhood, and by the end of the week, Marcus realized something important. People treated him differently now. At 13, Marcus was 6 feet tall and built like his father had been, broad shoulders and heavy hands. But where his father had been weak, Marcus chose to be strong. Where his father had run away from problems, Marcus ran toward them. Every fight made him more confident. Every victory added another layer to his growing legend. The teachers at his school knew his name before they met him. The local shopkeepers watched him carefully when he entered their stores. Even the older teenagers, the ones who had seemed so tough just months before, gave him space on the sidewalks. But it wasn't enough to just win fights. Marcus discovered he enjoyed the fear in people's eyes, the way conversations stopped when he walked into a room, the power that came from being known as dangerous. He started looking for reasons to fight, creating conflicts where none existed. A kid wearing the wrong football jersey became a target. Someone looking at him the wrong way earned a confrontation. A group of friends laughing too loudly must be laughing at him. By 15, Marcus had assembled a crew of followers, younger kids who basked in his reflected glory and did his bidding without question. There was Tommy, small and quick, who served as Marcus's eyes and ears throughout the neighborhood. Kevin, thick and loyal, who never questioned any of Marcus's decisions. And Jamie, the smart one, who helped Marcus plan their more elaborate schemes. Together, they controlled several blocks, collecting tribute from smaller kids, deciding who could walk where and when. The local police knew about Marcus, but proving anything was difficult. He was careful never to be caught in the act, and his victims were too scared to testify. Officer Patricia Williams had been trying to build a case against him for 2 years, but every time she got close, witnesses would disappear or change their stories. She watched him grow from a troubled kid into something much more dangerous, and She knew it was only a matter of time before someone got seriously hurt. Marcus's mother, Sarah, worked as a cleaner at a hotel in central London, a security guard at a shopping center on weekends, and stocked shelves at a grocery store 3 nights a week. She rarely saw her son anymore, leaving before dawn and returning after dark, too exhausted to do more than collapse into bed. The few times she tried to talk to Marcus about his behavior, about the rumors she heard from neighbors, he would either ignore her completely or explode into rage. She had stopped trying to control him after he put his fist through the kitchen wall during one argument, his knuckles bleeding, but his expression completely calm. The transformation was complete by the time Marcus turned 16. He had grown into his intimidating frame, standing 6 feet 3 inches and weighing nearly 200 pounds. His hands, permanently swollen from fighting, were registered weapons in the minds of everyone who knew him. His face, once soft with childhood, had hardened into sharp angles and cold eyes. When he smiled, which was rare, it never reached those eyes. When he spoke, people listened not because they wanted to, but because they were afraid not to. But Marcus was getting bored with his small kingdom. The neighborhood kids no longer provided any real challenge, and even the older teenagers had learned to avoid him completely. He needed bigger targets, more significant victories to maintain his sense of power. The local gangs had started reaching out, offering him a place in their more serious operations, but Marcus wasn't interested in being someone else's soldier. He had been the king of his domain for too long to accept being a foot soldier in someone else's army. That's when he started venturing into central London, looking for new challenges. The tourists and business people that didn't know his reputation didn't automatically step aside when they saw him coming. At first, he limited himself to verbal intimidation, enjoying the shock on their faces when this rough teenager invaded their polished world. But gradually, he began pushing further, testing how much he could get away with in these more public spaces. The security guards at the shopping centers were his first real challenge. Most of them were older, out of shape, more concerned with their paychecks than with confronting dangerous teenagers. Marcus learned he could push them quite far before they would actually call for backup. The occasional police officer was more of a threat, but they were spread thin and usually arrived long after Marcus had disappeared into the crowd. His crew loved these expeditions into the city center. They would follow Marcus through expensive shopping districts, watching him intimidate well-dressed shoppers and force business people to step aside. Tommy would film some of these encounters on his phone, and they would watch them later, laughing at the fear on their victims' faces. The videos never showed the full context, never revealed how Marcus had started each confrontation, but they serve as proof of his power for anyone who might doubt his reputation. Marcus's anger was always just beneath the surface, ready to explode at the slightest provocation. A tourist who didn't understand his threats quickly enough. A security guard who took too long to back down. A police officer who seemed to be considering taking action. The violence that followed was swift and brutal, Marcus using every advantage his size and experience provided. He fought like someone who had never learned the rules of fair play, because he never had. The other kids in his crew began to worry about how far Marcus was pushing things, but none of them dared to voice their concerns. They had seen what happened to people who questioned Marcus's decisions, how quickly his loyalty could turn to rage. They were all trapped in his orbit now, unable to leave, but increasingly uncomfortable with where his ambitions were leading them. Marcus's 17th birthday passed without celebration. His mother had forgotten, working a double shift at the hotel, and his crew had learned not to make a big deal about things that might remind Marcus of what he didn't have. But Marcus marked the day himself, deciding it was time to find a challenge worthy of his abilities. He had conquered his neighborhood, intimidated tourists and shopkeepers, faced down security guards, and avoided the police. There had to be something more, some target that would prove once and for all that nothing and nobody could stand against him. That's when Tommy mentioned the Royal Guards. He had been watching videos online, laughing at tourists who tried to get reactions from the famous soldiers who stood motionless outside Buckingham Palace. They just stand there, Tommy said, like statues. Don't matter what you do, they won't move. Marcus watched some of the videos, seeing tourists making faces at the guards, trying to get them to smile or flinch or react in any way. The guards remained perfectly still, eyes forward, expressions blank. "Bet I could make one move," Marcus said quietly, and his crew fell silent. They knew that tone, had learned to recognize when Marcus was making one of his plans. "But I could make one of them break that perfect little soldier act." Kevin, who usually supported everything Marcus said, looked uncomfortable. "Those are real soldiers, Marcus, not just security guards. They've got real training, real weapons." Marcus turned to look at Kevin, and the younger boy immediately regretted speaking up. "You think some toy soldier with a fancy hat is tougher than me? You think because he stands outside some old woman's house that makes him special?" The dangerous edge in Marcus's voice made Kevin step back, shaking his head quickly. But the idea had taken root in Marcus's mind. Here was a target that would prove everything he believed about himself. These guards were supposed to be elite soldiers, trained to remain calm under pressure, famous around the world for their discipline and control. If he could break one of them, could make one of these perfect soldiers lose his composure, it would be the ultimate demonstration of his power. Marcus spent the next week studying the guards, learning their routines, watching how they handled the constant stream of tourists. He saw that they were rotated regularly, that some positions were more isolated than others, that there were times when fewer people were around to witness what might happen. He also noticed something else. The guard were trained not to react to verbal provocation or minor physical contact. Tourists regularly touched them, posed for pictures next to them, even tried to trip them up with silly questions or rude gestures. But what would happen, Marcus wondered, if someone escalated beyond the tourist-level harassment these guards were used to? What would it take to break through their training and make one of them respond like a normal person? Marcus was certain he could find that breaking point, could push one of these supposedly unflappable soldiers past his limit. The plan began to form in his mind. It wouldn't be enough to just shout at a guard or wave his hands in front of his face like the tourist did. It wouldn't even be enough to push or shove him. If Marcus was going to prove his point, if he was going to show the world that no one was beyond his reach, he would need to do something that demanded a response. Something that would force even the most disciplined soldier to abandon his post and fight back. Marcus began visualizing the moment, imagining how it would feel to watch one of these perfect soldiers crumble under pressure. He pictured the guards, face changing, the mask of discipline slipping away to reveal the frightened man underneath. He imagined the chaos that would follow, the attention it would bring, the way his reputation would grow when people heard what he had done. His crew sensed something big was coming, but didn't dare ask for details. They had learned to recognize the signs when Marcus was planning something significant, the way his mood would shift, how he would become even more aggressive in their smaller encounters, like he was warming up for something bigger. Tommy kept filming their expeditions into the city, but now Marcus would often grab the phone away and delete the footage, saying he didn't want any evidence of their practice runs. As the plan solidified in Marcus's mind, he began to feel the familiar rush that came before his biggest fights. This would be different from intimidating school children or pushing around security guards. This would be a real test of everything he had built, everything he believed about himself. For the first time in years, Marcus felt genuinely excited about a challenge. The Royal Guard had no idea what was coming, but Marcus Thompson was about to give him the education of a lifetime. The morning was gray and cold when Marcus finally decided the time was right. His crew gathered around him as he explained what they were going to do, watching their faces carefully for any sign of doubt or hesitation. When Kevin opened his mouth to object, Marcus silenced him with a look that could have frozen fire. This was happening whether they liked it or not, and they would all be there to witness his greatest victory. The rain started early that Tuesday morning, turning the streets of London into rivers of gray water that reflected the overcast sky. Marcus Thompson woke up in his small bedroom, the sound of his mother leaving for work echoing through the thin walls of their flat. He lay in bed for a moment, listening to her footsteps fade down the hallway, then the front door closing with its familiar squeak. The silence that followed was complete, broken only by the steady drumming of rain against his window. Today was the day. Marcus had been planning this moment for 2 weeks, studying the guard schedules, learning the layout around Buckingham Palace, timing the tourist flows and police patrols. Everything had to be perfect because there would only be one chance to do this right. Once he made his move, there would be no going back, no second opportunities to prove his point. He rolled out of bed and walked to his wardrobe, selecting his clothes carefully. Black jeans, heavy boots, a dark hoodie that would help him blend into the crowd before the moment came. Marcus caught his reflection in the cracked mirror on his dresser and saw what others saw. A young man who looked older than his 17 years, with broad shoulders, scarred knuckles, and eyes that held no warmth. The mirror showed someone who had learned to survive by being harder than everyone around him, someone who had never backed down from a fight, because backing down meant becoming a victim again. His phone buzzed with messages from his crew. Tommy wanted to know what time to meet. Kevin was asking if they were really going through with this. Jamie had sent a link to a news article about increased security around royal residences, probably hoping Marcus would change his mind. Marcus ignored them all. He had made his decision, and nothing anyone said would change it now. At 9 in the morning, Marcus left his flat and began the journey into central London. The rain had intensified, turning the streets slick and making visibility poor. Most people hurried along with their heads down, umbrellas creating small islands of dryness as they navigated between puddles. Marcus walked slowly, deliberately, letting the rain soak through his hoodie. He wanted to feel cold and uncomfortable before the confrontation began. Anger came easier when he was already on edge. The train into the city was crowded with morning commuters, all of them pressed together in the humid air that smelled of wet clothes and tired bodies. Marcus stood near the doors, watching the other passengers carefully. A businessman reading a newspaper, a woman texting furiously on her phone, a group of tourists consulting a guidebook, planning their day of sightseeing. All of them soft, Marcus thought. All of them unprepared for real conflict. When someone accidentally bumped into him as the train swayed around a curve, Marcus felt his anger flare automatically. The man was older, maybe 50, wearing an expensive suit and carrying a briefcase. He looked up at Marcus with an apologetic expression, starting to say sorry, but the words died when he saw Marcus's face. The man quickly looked away and moved to a different part of the car, leaving Marcus standing alone in his small circle of space. That was the effect he had on people, the power he had cultivated so carefully over the years. Fear was a language everyone understood, and Marcus spoke it fluently. But today he was going to encounter someone who spoke a different language entirely, someone for whom fear was not a primary motivation. His crew was waiting at the agreed meeting point, a coffee shop near Green Park. They looked nervous, huddled around a small table with untouched drinks growing cold in front of them. Tommy kept checking his phone. Kevin was staring out the window, and Jamie had the guidebook open to a page about royal protocols and tourist guidelines. When Marcus walked in, shaking rain from his hair, all three of them looked up with expressions of relief and apprehension. "We don't have to do this," Kevin said before Marcus had even sat down. "There's other ways to make a point, other places where—" Marcus cut him off with a gesture. "You having second thoughts? Because if you are, you can walk away right now. Find your way home and forget you ever knew me." His voice was quiet, but everyone in the coffee shop seemed to sense the tension at their table. Conversations at nearby tables grew quieter, and the barista behind the counter kept glancing over nervously. Kevin shook his head quickly. "No, I'm in. We all are. Just want to make sure you've thought this through completely." Marcus smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "I've been thinking about this for years. Every time someone looked at me like I was nothing. Every time someone thought they were better than me because they had money or education or a fancy job. Every time someone assumed I would back down because that's what people like me are supposed to do." He leaned forward, and his three followers automatically leaned back. "Those guards think they're special, think their uniforms and their training make them untouchable. Today, I'm going to show them exactly how wrong they are." Tommy pulled out his phone. "Should I film it?" "For proof." "Put that away," Marcus snapped. "This isn't about making videos or showing off online. This is about respect, about proving that nobody, no matter how special they think they are, is beyond my reach." They finished their drinks in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what was coming. Marcus could see the doubt in their eyes, the way they kept glancing at each other when they thought he wasn't looking. Good. Let them be scared. Fear would make them more useful when the moment came, would ensure they followed his lead without question. The walk to Buckingham Palace took 20 minutes through the rain-soaked streets. The weather had kept many of the usual tourists away, leaving the sidewalks less crowded than normal. Marcus approved of this. Fewer witnesses meant fewer complications, fewer people who might interfere when things began to happen. The police would still come eventually, but by then it would be over. As they approached the palace gates, Marcus felt the familiar rush that came before major confrontations. His heartbeat increased, his muscles tensed, and his vision seemed to sharpen, filtering out everything except what was immediately important. This was the state he entered before every significant fight, when his body prepared itself for violence, and his mind cleared of everything except the immediate goal. The royal guards were exactly where Marcus had expected them to be, standing in their traditional positions outside the palace entrance. Even in the rain, they maintained perfect posture, their red uniforms and tall black hats creating stark contrasts against the gray morning. Tourists were still present despite the weather, taking pictures and trying various harmless pranks to get the guards to react. Marcus studied the scene carefully, identifying which guard would be his target. The one on the left was older, probably near the end of his career, with gray showing at his temples beneath his ceremonial hat. The one on the right looked younger, but was positioned too close to the main tourist area. But the guard in the center, standing alone near the side gate, was perfect. He appeared to be in his late 20s, stood exactly 6 feet tall, and had the build of someone who took physical fitness seriously. More importantly, he was isolated enough that Marcus could approach without immediately drawing attention from other guards or palace security. The tourists in his vicinity were scattered, more interested in photographing the main entrance than bothering with the side posts. This was the target Marcus had been looking for, the perfect representative of everything he wanted challenge. Marcus watched the guard for 10 minutes, studying his behavior and timing. The soldier stood perfectly still, eyes focused straight ahead, breathing steady and controlled. When tourists approached him, he showed no acknowledgement of their presence. When they spoke to him, asked him questions, or even made faces inches from his face, his expression never changed. A group of teenagers had spent 5 minutes trying various antics to get a reaction, eventually giving up and moving on to other guards. This was the discipline Marcus intended to break. This was the control he planned to shatter with one decisive action. He had identified exactly where he would strike and how he would do it, where the cameras were positioned, and which direction he would move afterward. Everything was planned except for what would happen after the guard finally broke, after Marcus proved his point about the illusion of untouchability. "There," Marcus said quietly, pointing toward his chosen target. "That one." His crew followed his gaze and saw the guard standing motionless in the rain, water running off his ceremonial uniform, but his posture never changing. Tommy swallowed hard. Kevin shifted nervously from foot to foot. Jamie opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again without speaking. "He looks professional," Kevin finally managed. Marcus laughed, a sound with no humor in it. They all look professional until someone shows them what real pressure feels like. Watch and learn. They moved closer, joining the scattered groups of tourists who were still brave enough to venture out in the rain. Marcus positioned his crew where they could see everything that was about to happen, but far enough away to avoid immediate involvement. He wanted them to witness his victory, but he also wanted them safe from whatever consequences might follow. The guard remained motionless as Marcus approached, giving no sign that he was aware of the danger moving toward him. His training had taught him to ignore distractions, to maintain his post regardless of what tourists might do around him. He had dealt with drunk people, rude people, confused people, and aggressive people. His instructors had prepared him for every type of civilian encounter he might face during his ceremonial duties. But his instructors had never prepared him for Marcus Thompson. They had never taught him how to handle someone who wasn't just testing boundaries or showing off for friends. They had never explained what to do when faced with genuine violence from someone who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. Marcus stopped 5 feet from the guard, studying his face for any sign of recognition or concern. The soldier's expression remained blank, his eyes focused on some distant point that only he could see. Rain ran down his face, but he didn't blink any more often than necessary. His hands remained perfectly positioned, his breathing stayed controlled, his posture never wavered. For a moment, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: doubt. This guard seemed genuinely unaffected by his presence, truly immune to the intimidation that had worked on everyone else Marcus had ever faced. The soldier stood there like a statue, like something carved from stone rather than flesh and blood. But then Marcus remembered every person who had underestimated him, every teacher who had written him off, every authority figure who had assumed he would back down when challenged. This guard was just another person who thought his uniform and training made him special, another representative of a system that had never given Marcus the respect he deserved. The doubt vanished, replaced by the cold anger that had driven him through every fight he had ever won. Marcus took another step closer, close enough now that the guard would have to acknowledge his presence. Still no reaction. The soldier continued staring straight ahead, as if Marcus didn't exist, as if he were completely invisible. This was the ultimate insult, the final proof that this guard thought himself above the reach of someone like Marcus Thompson. The rain continued to fall around them, creating a gray curtain that separated this moment from the rest of the world. Tourists moved in the distance, unaware that something significant was about to happen. Palace security continued their routine patrols, not yet recognizing the threat that had positioned itself directly in front of one of their guards. Marcus raised his right hand, forming it into the fist that had ended dozens of confrontations over the years. His knuckles were white with tension, his arm coiled with the potential energy of violence about to be released. This would be the punch that proved his point, that demonstrated once, and for all that nobody was beyond his reach. The guard still showed no reaction, no acknowledgement that he was aware of what was coming. His training had taught him to ignore threats, to maintain his post regardless of what happened around him. He was a professional soldier, committed to his duty and confident in his abilities. But he was about to learn something that no amount of training could have prepared him for. He was about to discover what happened when unstoppable force met immovable object, when modern violence collided with ancient tradition, when someone who had never learned limits encountered someone who represented absolute discipline. Marcus drew his fist back and prepared to throw the punch that would change everything. The punch that Marcus Thompson threw at Royal Guard James Mitchell contained every ounce of hatred, frustration, and violent energy that 17 years of hard living had built up inside him. His fist, hardened by countless street fights, connected with the guard's jaw with a sound like a hammer hitting stone. The impact sent shockwaves up Marcus's arm, through his shoulder, and into his very core. But James Mitchell didn't move. Not an inch. Not a tremor. The guard's head didn't snap back. His feet didn't shift. His hands didn't rise to defend himself. The ceremonial rifle remained perfectly positioned, his stance unchanged, his expression as blank as it had been moments before. The only evidence that anything had happened at all was the slight reddening of his jaw where Marcus's knuckles had connected. Marcus stared in disbelief, his fist still extended, his mind struggling to process what had just occurred. In his entire life, nobody had ever taken one of his punches without going down, without at least staggering backward, without showing some sign that they had been hurt. The physics of what had just happened didn't make sense to him. He had put everything he had into that blow, and it had accomplished absolutely nothing. The tourists around them began to notice that something unusual was happening. A woman with a camera lowered it slowly, her mouth opening in shock. A family with small children started backing away, the parents instinctively moving to shield their kids from whatever was unfolding. An elderly man called out, "I say," in a voice that carried across the courtyard. Marcus threw a second punch, this one aimed at the guard's temple. Again, the impact was solid, the sound of contact clear and sharp. Again, James Mitchell didn't react in any way. His breathing remained steady, his posture perfect, his gaze fixed on some distant point that only he could see. It was as if Marcus was attacking a statue, something carved from marble rather than flesh and blood. But James Mitchell was very much flesh and blood. Inside his mind, he was processing everything that was happening with the clarity that years of military training had given him. He felt each punch, registered the pain that shot through his jaw, and temple acknowledged the threat that Marcus represented. But his training had taught him that movement was surrender, that reaction was failure, that his duty transcended any personal consideration of comfort or safety. Mitchell had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before accepting his position with the Queen's Guard. He had been shot at, had bombs explode near his position, had faced enemy soldiers who were trying to kill him. A teenager throwing punches in the rain was not going to break his discipline, no matter how hard those punches landed or how much they hurt. Marcus stepped back, flexing his right hand. His knuckles were beginning to swell, and there was blood seeping from where the skin had split against the guard's jaw. The pain was sharp and immediate, but what bothered him more was the complete lack of effect his attacks were having. This guard was treating his best efforts like they were nothing more than gentle taps from a child. The crowd of tourists was growing larger now, people drawn by the unusual spectacle of someone actually attacking a royal guard. Most of them had their phones out, recording what was happening, though none of them seemed willing to intervene. Marcus could hear voices in the background, some calling for security, others simply expressing shock at what they were witnessing. "What's wrong with you?" Marcus shouted at the guard, his voice cracking with frustration and growing panic. "Why won't you fight back?" Still no response. James Mitchell continued staring straight ahead, as if Marcus wasn't even there, as if the punches and the shouting were happening in some other dimension that he couldn't perceive. Marcus threw a third punch, then a fourth, each one landing solidly but accomplishing nothing except further damage to his own hands. By the fifth punch, his knuckles were split and bleeding freely, and his wrist was beginning to ache from the repeated impacts against what felt like a stone wall. But the guard remained exactly as he had been, perfect in his stillness, absolute in his discipline. The crowd had grown to nearly 50 people now, forming a rough circle around Marcus and the guard. The voices were getting louder, more urgent. Someone was calling for police. Another person was trying to get through to palace security on their phone. But still nobody moved to physically intervene, all of them paralyzed by the surreal nature of what they were watching. Marcus's crew stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, their faces pale with shock and growing fear. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Marcus was supposed to demonstrate his dominance, prove his point, show everyone that even the most disciplined soldiers could be broken if you pushed hard enough. Instead, he was beating his hands bloody against someone who seemed to be made of stone. Tommy had his phone out, filming despite Marcus's earlier instructions not to record anything. His hands were shaking so badly that the video would be nearly unwatchable, but he couldn't seem to stop recording. This was unlike anything any of them had ever seen, unlike anything they had thought was possible. Marcus was breathing hard now, his stamina beginning to flag from the repeated impacts and the adrenaline that was flooding his system. His right hand was a mess of split knuckles and flowing blood, and his left wasn't much better. But worse than the physical pain was the psychological damage being inflicted by the guard's complete indifference to his attack. For the first time in years, Marcus was encountering something he couldn't intimidate, couldn't hurt, couldn't force to acknowledge his dominance. The guard stood there like a monument to discipline and duty, immune to violence, untouched by threats, completely beyond Marcus's ability to affect or control. "Fight back!" Marcus screamed, throwing another punch that sent fresh pain shooting up his arm. "Do something. Say something." But James Mitchell remained silent and, still, a living representation of everything that Marcus had spent his life trying to tear down. Authority, discipline, unshakable confidence in something larger than oneself. The palace security team was approaching now, moving through the crowd with professional efficiency. Marcus could see them coming, could hear the radios crackling with urgent communications, could sense that his window of opportunity was rapidly closing. But he couldn't stop. He had committed everything to this confrontation, had staked his entire reputation on being able to break this one man's composure. He threw punch after punch, his technique deteriorating as desperation took over. His hands were slick with blood now, making it difficult to form proper fists. His breathing was ragged, his movements becoming wild and uncontrolled. But still the guard stood unmoved, untouched by the chaos swirling around him. James Mitchell was aware of the approaching security team, just as he was aware of Marcus's increasing desperation and the growing crowd of onlookers. His training told him to maintain his post until properly relieved, to continue his duty regardless of what was happening around him. But more than that, his personal code demanded that he not give this young man the satisfaction of a reaction. He had seen boys like Marcus before, during his tours overseas. Young men who had learned that violence was the solution to every problem, who had never encountered anything they couldn't intimidate or overcome through force. They were dangerous in their own environment, among people who shared their worldview, but they were lost when confronted with genuine discipline and purpose. The security team reached the edge of the crowd, their voices cutting through the rain and the noise of the gathering tourists. "Stand back. Everyone stand back." The crowd began to disperse, people moving away reluctantly, many still filming with their phones, unwilling to miss the conclusion of this unprecedented event. Marcus heard the security officers approaching and knew his time was running out. In desperation, he grabbed the guard's rifle, trying to wrench it away from him. For the first time, James Mitchell moved, but only to tighten his grip on his weapon. His stance shifted slightly, his muscles tensed, but his expression remained unchanged. The rifle didn't move an inch. This small reaction was enough to send Marcus into a final frenzy of violence. He threw a wild haymaker that missed completely, sending him stumbling forward. His next punch glanced off the guard's shoulder harmlessly. His third attempt was intercepted by one of the security officers, who grabbed Marcus's wrist and began the process of restraining him. "No!" Marcus screamed, struggling against the security officer's grip. He has to fight back. He has to. But even as two more officers joined the effort to subdue him, even as they forced him to the ground and began the arrest procedure, James Mitchell remained at his post, standing perfectly still in the rain. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 10 minutes, but to Marcus it felt like a lifetime. As the security officers pinned him to the wet pavement, as he felt the handcuffs being applied to his bloody wrists, he continued staring at the guard who had destroyed everything he believed about himself. James Mitchell stood exactly as he had before, rifle at the perfect angle, posture immaculate, gaze fixed on the horizon. The only evidence of what had transpired was the slight bruising on his jaw and the blood on his uniform, Marcus's blood from his split knuckles. Otherwise, it was as if nothing had happened at all. The crowd was dispersing now, urged along by additional security personnel who had arrived to manage the scene. But many people were lingering at the edges, still filming, still trying to process what they had just witnessed. The videos would be online within hours, shared across social media platforms around the world, turning Marcus Thompson into the most famous failed bully in internet history. Marcus was hauled to his feet, his legs unsteady beneath him. As the officers began to lead him away, he turned back for one last look at the guard who had broken him. James Mitchell remained exactly where he had been, as motionless as a statue, as unaffected as if the entire incident had been nothing more than a gentle breeze. "Ow!" Marcus whispered, the word barely audible over the rain and the noise of the crowd. "How did you do that?" But James Mitchell didn't answer. He simply continued his duty, standing guard over a tradition that was older than Marcus's entire family line, representing values that transcended any individual's need for recognition or dominance. He was a royal guard, and royal guards did not break. As Marcus was led away toward the waiting police car, his crew scattered into the crowd, unwilling to be associated with what had just transpired. Tommy deleted the video from his phone, not wanting any evidence that he had been present. Kevin and Jamie simply walked away, their faith in Marcus's invincibility shattered as completely as his bloody knuckles. The incident was over, but its consequences were just beginning. Marcus Thompson, who had spent years building a reputation as someone who could intimidate anyone, had just been humiliated in front of dozens of witnesses and countless online viewers. His reign of terror in his neighborhood was about to come to an end. His crew was about to abandon him, and his mother was about to discover that her son had become something she could no longer ignore or excuse. But the guard remained at his post, duty intact, honor unblemished, a living reminder that some things in the world were truly unbreakable. The video went viral within 6 hours of Marcus being arrested. Tommy, despite deleting his own recording, hadn't been the only person filming the incident. 17 different angles of Marcus Thompson punching a motionless royal guard have been uploaded to social media platforms across the internet, each one capturing the same humiliating truth. The neighborhood's most feared bully had been defeated by someone who never even acknowledged his existence. The footage was shared millions of times in the first 24 hours. TikTok users created remixes with dramatic music. Twitter accounts added commentary that ranged from mocking to incredulous. Reddit threads analyzed every frame, with users pointing out the exact moment when Marcus realized his punches were having no effect. The incident became a meme, a cautionary tale, and a source of endless entertainment for people around the world. But while the internet found the situation amusing, the consequences for Marcus were immediate and devastating. His arrest photo, showing his swollen and bloody hands alongside his shocked and defeated expression, appeared in newspapers across London. The charges against him were serious: assault on a member of the Royal Guard, disturbing the peace, and threatening behavior in a royal residence area. Marcus spent his first night in a holding cell at Westminster Magistrates' Court, his hands bandaged but still throbbing with pain. The cell was small and cold, with concrete walls that seemed to press in around him as he tried to understand what had happened. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the guard's impassive face, felt again the shock of throwing his hardest punch and accomplishing nothing. His mother, Sarah, learned about the incident when her supervisor at the hotel showed her the viral video on his phone. She had been cleaning rooms on the 7th floor when he found her, his expression a mixture of sympathy and concern. "Isn't this your boy?" he asked, holding up the screen that showed her son attacking a soldier who stood perfectly still in the rain. Sarah watched the footage 3 times before she could speak, her hands clutching the edge of a housekeeping cart for support. This was her Marcus, her little boy who had once brought her flowers picked from the neighbor's garden, transformed into someone she barely recognized. The violence in the video was shocking enough, but what disturbed her more was the desperation she could see in his movements, the way he seemed to be falling apart even as he threw punch after punch. She left work immediately, ignoring her supervisor's protests about her shift not being finished. The train ride to Westminster felt like the longest journey of her life, her mind racing through memories of Marcus as a child, trying to identify the moment when everything had gone wrong. She thought about the nights she had worked late, the conversations they hadn't had, the signs she had missed because she was too exhausted to notice them. The legal system moved quickly when it came to assaulting royal guards. Marcus appeared before a magistrate the next morning, his hands still bandaged, and his face showing the exhaustion of a sleepless night. His court-appointed solicitor, a tired-looking woman named Helen Morrison, had reviewed his case and delivered the harsh reality. Given the high-profile nature of the incident and the serious charges, Marcus was looking at significant jail time. The Crown Prosecution Service is treating this as a terrorist-adjacent offense, she explained quietly while they waited for his case to be called. Attacking a royal guard is considered a threat to national security. Combined with your previous record of violence and intimidation, they're pushing for the maximum sentence. Marcus barely heard her words. He was still trapped in the memory of those moments outside Buckingham Palace, still trying to understand how his strongest punches had accomplished nothing. The physical pain in his hands was manageable, but the psychological damage was overwhelming. For the first time in years, Marcus felt genuinely afraid, not of what might happen to him, but of what had already happened to his sense of himself. The hearing was brief and formal. Marcus pleaded not guilty on the advice of a solicitor, though the evidence against him was overwhelming. The judge, a stern elderly man who had clearly seen the viral videos, denied bail and remanded Marcus to custody pending trial. As he was led away, Marcus caught sight of his mother in the public gallery, tears streaming down her face. Pentonville Prison was unlike anything Marcus had experienced, despite his years of street violence. The other inmates knew who he was before he arrived, having seen the videos and heard the story. But instead of the respect he had expected, Marcus found himself the target of mockery and contempt. In prison, reputation was everything, and Marcus's reputation was now that of someone who had been humiliated by a man who hadn't even fought back. His cellmate was an older man named Robert Chun, serving time for armed robbery. Robert had been in the system for most of his adult life and understood the dynamics of prison society better than anyone. On Marcus's first night, he offered some advice that would prove prophetic. "You think you're tough because you scared some school kids and beat up some civilians," Robert said, lying on his narrow bunk and staring at the ceiling. "But real toughness, real strength, that's something else entirely. That guard you try to fight, he showed you what real strength looks like. Question is, are you smart enough to learn from it?" Marcus spent the next weeks in a kind of psychological free fall. Without his crew, without his reputation, without the fear that had always surrounded him, he was forced to confront who he really was underneath all the violence and intimidation. The answer was terrifying. He was a scared, angry kid who had never learned any way to interact with the world except through force. The other inmates treated him with casual disdain. Guards showed him no special consideration. The violence that had always been his solution to every problem was useless here, where real criminals with real experience could see through his facade immediately. Marcus found himself at the bottom of a hierarchy he had never known existed, powerless in a way he had never experienced. His mother visited him every week, taking time off from her jobs to make the journey to the prison. Sarah had aged visibly in the weeks since the incident, the stress and shame of her son's actions taking a physical toll that was evident to anyone who looked at her. During their conversations in the sterile visiting room, she tried to understand how things had gone so wrong. "I knew you were angry," she said during one visit, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew you were getting into fights, but I never imagined you could do something like this." Her eyes were red from crying, her hands shaking as she reached across the table toward him. Marcus wanted to comfort her, to explain that he hadn't meant for things to go this far, but he couldn't find the words. How could he tell her that he had attacked the guard simply to prove he could? How could he explain that he had built his entire identity around being someone others feared, only to discover that real strength looked nothing like what he had thought? The trial was scheduled for 3 months after his arrest, giving his solicitor time to build a defense. But as the weeks passed, it became clear that there was no real defense to offer. The evidence was overwhelming, the videos were clear, and Marcus's history of violence made any claim of momentary aberration impossible to sustain. Meanwhile, the internet never forgot. New memes featuring Marcus appeared regularly, often comparing him to cartoon characters bouncing harmlessly off immovable objects. His name became synonymous with feudal aggression, with the kind of impotent rage that accomplished nothing except embarrassing the person displaying it. Comment sections filled with speculation about what had driven him to attack someone so obviously beyond his ability to intimidate. Back in his neighborhood, Marcus's former territory was quickly carved up by other young men eager to fill the power vacuum his arrest had created. Tommy, Kevin, and Jamie had all distanced themselves from him completely, claiming they had never really been his friends and had only followed him out of fear. The respect that Marcus had spent years building evaporated overnight, replaced by the kind of mocking disregard that he had once directed at others. The local police, led by Officer Patricia Williams, finally had the evidence they needed to investigate all the complaints that had been filed against Marcus over the years. Without his intimidating presence keeping witnesses silent, people began coming forward with stories of harassment, assault, and extortion. Additional charges were filed, painting a picture of systematic bullying that went back several years. Marcus's world had collapsed so completely that he sometimes wondered if he was dreaming, if he would wake up back in his small bedroom with his reputation intact and his future still under his control. But every morning brought the same reality: concrete walls, scheduled meals, and the knowledge that he had destroyed everything he had worked to build with one moment of spectacular miscalculation. During one particularly difficult night, lying awake on his narrow prison cot, Marcus finally began to understand what the guard had represented. It wasn't just discipline or training or professional duty. It was something deeper, the kind of strength that came from serving something larger than yourself, from being part of a tradition that had lasted for centuries, from knowing that your personal comfort was less important than your responsibility to others. Marcus had spent his entire life trying to prove he was stronger than everyone around him, but he had been measuring strength all wrong. Real strength wasn't about making others fear you or forcing them to submit to your will. Real strength was what he had seen in that guard's face: the ability to remain calm under pressure, to maintain your principles when they were being tested, to serve others even when it cost you personally. The realization was painful because it meant acknowledging that everything he had believed about himself was wrong. The reputation he had built, the fear he had inspired, the dominance he had established, none of it represented real strength. It was all just elaborate weakness disguised as power, a teenager's desperate attempt to feel important in a world that had never given him the respect he craved. As his trial date approached, Marcus began to understand that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't control. The videos would never disappear from the internet. His reputation would never recover. The fear that had surrounded him was gone forever, replaced by the kind of mocking disrespect that followed spectacular failure. But for the first time since the incident, Marcus began to wonder if that might not be entirely a bad thing. If his old life was based on lies, maybe losing it was an opportunity to build something real, something based on the kind of strength he had seen in that motionless guard standing in the rain. The thought was terrifying, but it was also the first genuine hope Marcus had felt in weeks. Maybe there was a way forward that didn't involve violence or intimidation. Maybe there was a way to be strong without making others weak, to be respected without being feared. The guard had shown him a different way to be a man, even if Marcus hadn't understood it at the time. Now, sitting in his prison cell with his old life in ruins around him, Marcus finally had the chance to learn what that lesson really meant. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered to Marcus Thompson's prison cell with the day's mail distribution. His name was written across the front in careful handwriting that he didn't recognize, and there was no return address to indicate who might have sent it. Marcus had received very few letters during his 3 months in Pentonville, mostly legal documents and the occasional note from his mother, so this unexpected correspondence immediately caught his attention. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper with a brief message that would change the trajectory of Marcus's life forever. The letter read, "Mr. Thompson, my name is James Mitchell. I am the guard you encountered outside Buckingham Palace 3 months ago. I have been following your case through the newspapers and felt compelled to write to you. I understand you are scheduled to appear for sentencing next week, and I wanted you to know that I will be submitting a statement to the court on your behalf. I do not excuse what you did, but I believe I understand why you did it. I have seen young men like you before during my military service overseas. You are not evil, Mr. Thompson. You are lost, angry, and looking for meaning in all the wrong places. If you are willing to listen, I would like to offer you an alternative to the path you have been following. Real strength is not about dominating others or inspiring fear. Real strength comes from service, discipline, and the willingness to be part of something larger than yourself. I have spoken with my commanding officer about your situation. If the court is willing to consider alternatives to a lengthy prison sentence, we may be able to offer you a chance to discover what true strength looks like. The choice, as always, is yours. Respectfully, James Mitchell, Guardsman, Grenadier Guards. Marcus read the letter 6 times before he fully processed its contents. The guard he had attacked, the man whose composure he had been unable to break, was offering to help him. Not only that, but he was suggesting that Marcus might have a future beyond the prison sentence that seemed inevitable. The idea was so unexpected, so contrary to everything Marcus had assumed about how the world worked, that his first instinct was to dismiss it as some kind of trick. Why would this guard want to help him? What possible motivation could he have for showing kindness to someone who had attacked him unprovoked? But as Marcus reread the letter, he began to hear something in the words that he had never encountered before: genuine understanding without judgment. Mitchell wasn't excusing what Marcus had done, but he was suggesting that there might be reasons for it beyond simple evil or inherent violence. The guard seemed to see something in Marcus that Marcus had never seen in himself. That evening, Marcus showed the letter to his cellmate Robert, whose years of experience in the prison system had given him insight into human nature that Marcus was beginning to appreciate. Robert read the letter carefully, then handed it back with an expression of mild surprise. "That's remarkable," Robert said. "In 20 years inside and out of this system, I've never seen anything like this. A victim reaching out to help his attacker? That's not just unusual, it's practically unprecedented." "You think it's real?" Marcus asked. "Not some kind of setup or trick?" Robert considered this carefully. Guards don't generally go to the trouble of setting elaborate traps for prisoners who are already caught. This Mitchell fellow, he's offering you something genuine. Question is, are you smart enough to take it? Marcus spent the next week thinking about the letter, about what it meant, and what it might represent for his future. His trial was approaching rapidly, and his solicitor had prepared him for the worst-case scenario: 3 to 5 years in prison, followed by probation and a criminal record that would make finding legitimate employment nearly impossible. But Mitchell's letter suggested another possibility, one that Marcus had never considered. What if strength really was about service rather than domination? What if the military discipline that had made Mitchell immovable in the face of attack could be learned and applied to civilian life? The trial took place on a cold morning in late November. The courtroom was packed with journalists and curious observers, many of whom had seen the viral videos and wanted to witness the conclusion of the story. Marcus sat in the dock, wearing the only decent clothes his mother had been able to bring him, trying to maintain some dignity as his solicitor presented what little defense could be offered. The prosecution case was straightforward and devastating. The videos spoke for themselves, showing clear evidence of unprovoked assault on a member of the Royal Guard. Character witnesses testified to Marcus's history of violence and intimidation in his neighborhood. Police officers described the pattern of complaints and incidents that had led up to the attack at Buckingham Palace. But then something unexpected happened. James Mitchell took the stand as a witness, not for the prosecution as everyone had expected, but to offer testimony that would complicate the simple narrative of a violent criminal receiving his just punishment. Mitchell was in full dress uniform, his bearing confident and professional. He acknowledged that Marcus had attacked him, confirmed that the videos were accurate, and accepted that the assault had been unprovoked. But then he began to speak about what he had seen in Marcus's behavior that day, and his words carried the weight of someone who had faced real combat and understood the difference between evil and misdirection. "Your Honor," Mitchell said, "I have served in Afghanistan, where I encountered genuine terrorists and people committed to violence as a way of life. Mr. Thompson is not one of those people. He is a young man who has never learned appropriate ways to channel his anger and frustration, who has mistaken aggression for strength and intimidation for respect." The judge listened carefully as Mitchell continued. "I do not minimize what he did to me that day. It was assault, it was wrong, and it cannot be excused. But I believe Mr. Thompson is capable of redemption if given the proper guidance and structure. The military has programs designed to help young people like him find better ways to direct their energy and abilities." Mitchell then outlined a proposal that he had developed in consultation with his commanding officers and military social workers. If the court was willing to consider an alternative to traditional incarceration, the Army would accept Marcus into a special program designed for at-risk youth. It would involve 6 months of basic training, followed by 2 years of supervised service with psychological counseling and education programs throughout. "The program is demanding," Mitchell explained, "more demanding than prison in many ways. Mr. Thompson would have to earn his place every day, prove himself worthy of the trust we would be placing in him. But if he succeeds, he would emerge with skills, discipline, and purpose that could transform his life completely." The judge asked numerous questions about the program, about Mitchell's motivations for proposing it, and about the safeguards in place to protect the public if Marcus proved unable to change. Mitchell answered each question with the same calm precision that had made him unmovable under Marcus's attack, demonstrating the kind of competence and reliability that made his proposal credible. Marcus listened to this testimony with growing amazement. Not only was the guard he had attacked refusing to seek revenge, he was actively working to provide Marcus with opportunities that he had never imagined possible. It was a demonstration of mercy and wisdom that challenged everything Marcus thought he knew about how people treated their enemies. When Mitchell finished his testimony, the judge called a recess to consider this unexpected development. Marcus was returned to the holding cell beneath the courthouse, where he waited with his solicitor to learn his fate. Helen Morrison was cautiously optimistic about Mitchell's intervention, but she warned Marcus that the final decision would rest entirely with the judge. "This is your chance," she said. "Probably the only chance you'll get to avoid a lengthy prison sentence. But if the judge agrees to this alternative, you'll have to prove yourself every single day. Military discipline isn't a game, Marcus. They'll expect more from you than anyone ever has before." When court reconvened, the judge delivered a verdict that surprised everyone present. He found Marcus guilty of assault, but suspended the prison sentence in favor of Mitchell's alternative program. The conditions were strict. Any violation of the program's requirements would result in immediate incarceration for the full term. Marcus would be supervised constantly, required to submit to drug testing, and forbidden from returning to his old neighborhood for the duration of the program. "Mr. Thompson," the judge said, looking directly at Marcus, "Guardsman Mitchell has offered you an extraordinary opportunity. He believes you are capable of redemption, despite evidence that might suggest otherwise. I am willing to give you this chance, but understand that it may be your last. If you fail to take advantage of this opportunity, you will face the full consequences of your actions." As Marcus was led from the courtroom, he caught sight of Mitchell in the gallery. The guard nodded once, a gesture that somehow conveyed both encouragement and warning. Marcus was being given a chance to rebuild his life, but it would require him to abandon everything he had been and learn to become something entirely new. The next 6 months would prove to be the most difficult of Marcus's life. Military basic training stripped away every pretense and forced him to confront his weaknesses without the defensive anger that had protected him for so long. The physical challenges were demanding, but the psychological ones were overwhelming. For the first time, Marcus was required to think about others before himself, to consider the consequences of his actions, to find strength through cooperation rather than domination. He failed many of the early tests, both physical and mental. There were times when he wanted to quit, to accept prison as easier than the constant pressure to improve himself. But each time he reached his breaking point, he would remember Mitchell's letter, the guard's unwavering composure under attack, and the mercy that had given him this opportunity. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, Marcus began to change. The anger that had driven him for so long didn't disappear, but he learned to channel it into productive effort. The need for respect that had motivated his violence found new outlets in earning the approval of his instructors and the friendship of his fellow trainees. The strength he had always sought began to emerge, not through intimidating others, but through pushing himself to meet standards he had never imagined he could achieve. 2 years later, Marcus Thompson graduated from the program as a different person entirely. He had learned trade skills that would allow him to find legitimate employment, developed discipline that would serve him for the rest of his life, and discovered that true strength came from service to others rather than domination over them. On graduation day, James Mitchell was present in the audience, watching as the young man who had once attacked him receive recognition for his transformation. When Marcus spotted him after the ceremony, he approached with the kind of respectful confidence that military training had instilled in him. "I never thank you properly," Marcus said, standing at attention. "For the letter, for the opportunity, for believing I could be better than I was." Mitchell smiled, the first expression Marcus had ever seen on his face besides stoic professionalism. "You thank me by proving me right. The man standing here today is nothing like the boy who attacked me outside the palace. That transformation is entirely your accomplishment." Marcus went on to become a youth counselor, working with teenagers who reminded him of his former self. He never forgot the lesson that Mitchell had taught him, that true strength was not about breaking others, but about remaining unbroken yourself. The viral videos of his humiliation were still online, still shared and mocked, but Marcus had learned to see them differently. They represented the moment when his old life ended and his real life began. The guard who had refused to fight back had given him the greatest victory of all, the chance to become someone worth respecting, someone who could stand unmoved in the face of challenges, someone who understood that the strongest people were those who served others rather than themselves. In the end, Marcus Thompson learned that the immovable object he had encountered outside Buckingham Palace was not just one man's discipline, but a way of being that he could choose for himself. The punch that had once shattered his knuckles had ultimately opened a door to a life he never could have imagined, guided by the unexpected kindness of the man he had tried so hard to break.